Scout suddenly stopped, ears perked up, and body entirely alert. A loud, sharp bark echoed down the narrow trail, causing Beck and Megan to halt their walk. They exchanged a confused glance. Something was different. Scout was a calm dog, rarely showing any agitation. But now he seemed completely focused on something ahead, hidden among the trees and bushes lining the path. "Scout," Beck called, trying to calm the dog, but he didn't move. His fur was bristled, as if he sensed something they couldn't see yet. The forest, which had always been a place of peace and tranquility for the couple, suddenly felt denser, darker. The sound of the wind rustling the leaves seemed to have vanished, replaced by a heavy silence that made Megan's heart race. Did he see another animal? Megan whispered, looking around. The tall trees and thick bushes cast shadows that danced in the weak late afternoon light. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but the remaining light seemed insufficient to shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Beck furrowed his brow but didn't respond. He knew Scout well and understood that the dog was not easily frightened. There was something there, something they couldn't see yet, but Scout seemed to sense it. Beck looked ahead on the path, where Scout stood still, as if waiting for something. The dog's eyes were fixed on a specific point among the trees, as if he knew exactly what was hidden there. "Let's see what it is," Beck said, trying to sound more confident than he actually felt. He knew that whatever was causing Scout's unease wouldn't be easy to ignore. Megan hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. They knew they needed to trust the dog's instincts. With slow, careful steps, the couple began to follow the dog down the trail, which now seemed narrower and more enclosed than before. The sound of their own footsteps echoed loudly in their ears, and Megan felt a shiver run down her spine. Scout moved ahead, sniffing the ground and occasionally lifting his head, as if he was monitoring every movement around them. Megan's heart raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that could change everything. Beck seemed calm, but Megan knew her husband well. She understood that he felt the tension in the air too, even if he didn't want to show it. "Do you think everything's okay?" Megan asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. Beck didn't answer right away, but looked at her with a half-smile, as if trying to reassure her. However, his eyes betrayed the uncertainty he was trying to hide. "We'll find out," he finally said, his voice steady, but with a tone of caution that Megan couldn't ignore. They continued to follow Scout, who moved slowly, as if leading them to something he knew was there. The forest, which had once felt like a refuge, was now transforming into a place filled with shadows and secrets. What could be waiting for them among those trees? What could lie ahead? What had Scout found? The answer was close, but what awaited Beck and Megan in that forest could be something they would never forget. What do you think Scout found in the forest? Would you have the courage to follow your dog in a situation like this? Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on emotional and inspiring stories about the love and loyalty of dogs that will touch your heart. Scout stopped once again, now at a point where the vegetation was thicker, nearly blocking Beck and Megan's view. The dog was intently staring at a cluster of bushes, sniffing the air more vigorously. Beck frowned, feeling the weight of the tension increase. He pushed aside some branches with his hands, and then he saw it. "Oh my God," Megan murmured, her voice almost a whisper. Before them, in a small natural clearing, a wolf was lying on the ground. Its robust gray-furred body was moving with difficulty. There was a trap caught in its hind leg, the metal glinting in the weak light, and Beck could see blood slowly trickling down, staining the earth around it. The wolf lifted its head with effort upon sensing their presence, its yellow eyes filled with pain, but also with an impressive strength, as if, despite its suffering, it was still willing to fight. A low, raspy growl escaped its throat, causing Megan to take a step back, frightened. "Beck, she's hurt," Megan said, her voice trembling. "And look, she's caught in that horrible trap." Beck slowly crouched down, trying not to make any sudden movements that might scare the animal further. He knew that a wolf, even when injured, could still be dangerous. But what worried him more was the look in her eyes. There was something more there, something that went beyond physical pain. She's in bad shape, Beck said quietly, assessing the situation. The trap was deeply embedded in the wolf's flesh. He knew that if they didn't do something quickly, she wouldn't survive. But how could they approach her without her seeing them as a threat? Megan looked at Beck and he could see tears beginning to form in her eyes. We need to help her. We can't leave her here like this, Beck. She's going to die. Beck hesitated. He also couldn't bear the thought of leaving her there, but he knew that one wrong move could be dangerous for both them and the animal. He glanced at Scout, who was sitting beside them, staring at the wolf without making a sound. It was as if the dog understood the gravity of the situation. Something here was larger than just an encounter with a wild animal. I know, Megan, he finally replied, his voice low. But we need to be careful. She's scared and pain, and she might attack us. Megan knelt beside Beck, still keeping a certain distance from the wolf. Her eyes scanned the animal's body, and then she noticed something that made her heart race even faster. Beck, look at her. She has pups. Her teats are swollen. Oh my God, she has pups nearby. Megan covered her mouth with her hand, terror in her eyes. If she dies, the pups will die too. They must be around here, alone. Beck felt the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders. It wasn't just the wolf in danger. There was an entire family at stake, lives depending on a quick decision. He looked around, trying to see if he could spot any sign of the pups, but there was nothing. Just the dense, silent forest. We need to get her out of that trap, Beck said with renewed determination. And then we'll look for the pups. We can't leave them alone. The wolf, as if understanding what was being said, let out a low whimper, her body trembling with the effort to stay conscious. Beck knew that every minute counted. What would you do in Beck and Megan's place? Would you risk your safety to free the wolf? Or would you call for help first? Megan could hardly contain her anxiety. The sight of the injured wolf was devastating, but now, knowing she had pups, the situation felt even more desperate. Beck kept his eyes glued to the animal, trying to think quickly. They needed to free her from the trap and get her to a safe place. The pups would be helpless without her, but they couldn't leave her there suffering. If she has pups, they must be nearby, Megan said, her voice trembling. But we need to get her out of here first. Beck nodded immediately. Let's take her home. It's not far, and she needs care before we can do anything else. Carefully, he crouched beside the wolf. The trap was deeply embedded, and the dried blood indicated she had been there for hours. He worked quickly to release the mechanism, trying not to cause her more pain. With a sharp click, the trap finally opened, and the wolf pulled her leg close, too exhausted even to try to stand. Help me carry her, Beck asked. Together, they managed to lift the animal, who was softly whimpering in pain. The walk back home wasn't long, but each step felt heavy with urgency and tension. Scout moved ahead, sniffing the air, alert for any signs of the pups. Once they arrived home, they laid the wolf down on the kitchen floor in a corner where she could rest. Quick, we need to take care of this wound, Beck said. He grabbed a clean towel and wet it with warm water while Megan fetched the first aid kit. They cleaned the blood and tried to staunch the bleeding as much as they could. The wolf watched their every move, her yellow eyes tracking Beck and Megan, though she was too weak to react. It's going to be okay, Megan murmured, gently running her hands over the wolf's fur. She needs water, Beck said, grabbing a bowl and filling it with fresh water. The wolf, hesitant at first, finally gave in and began to drink slowly. Megan opened the fridge, looking for something to offer. She found a piece of meat, which she cut into small pieces before placing it in front of the wolf. Here, girl, you need to eat. The wolf sniffed the meat for a moment, then began to devour it hungrily, which made Megan smile slightly. She's going to survive, Megan said, a mix of relief and hope in her voice. Beck, however, was focused on the pups. Now, we need to find them, he said firmly. Scout can help us? The dog perked up, as if understanding the urgency. He sniffed the wolf for a few seconds, circled around, and then started walking toward the forest. Let's follow him, Beck said as they quickly prepared to head back to the trail. Time was not on their side. Scout moved through the forest with his nose close to the ground, carefully sniffing each patch of soil. Beck and Megan followed closely, trying not to lose sight of the dog while dodging low branches and roots that seemed to sprout from the ground with every step. The forest, which had once held a tranquil beauty, now felt filled with dark secrets. The silence was almost complete, except for the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional sound of Scout sniffing. Beck felt adrenaline coursing through his veins. With every passing minute, the fear that the pups were too far away or in danger grew. He glanced over at Megan, who walked beside him with a tense face, focused. He knew she was just as worried as he was, perhaps even more. "Do you think they're okay?" Megan suddenly asked, her voice low, barely breaking the silence around them. "What if it's too late?" "We need to trust Scout," Beck replied, trying to sound more confident than he truly felt. "If the pups are around here, he'll find them." The search felt endless. The trail grew increasingly narrow, with thick bushes and tall trees blocking the light of the sun that was beginning to fade on the horizon. The forest became darker by the minute, only intensifying the sense of urgency and danger. Scout suddenly stopped, his body tense, nose pointed towards a dense thicket ahead. He looked back at Beck and Megan, as if waiting for confirmation before moving on. "Is it over there?" Megan murmured, hopeful. Beck nodded slowly, his heart racing. "Let's check it out." They approached cautiously, carefully pushing aside the bushes. What they saw made Megan's heart race. Among the leaves and dry branches were 3 small wolf pups, huddled against each other. Their fragile bodies trembled, and their large, frightened eyes stared directly at the humans observing them. "Oh my God!" Megan exclaimed, kneeling immediately. "They're here, Beck! They're alive!" Beck felt a huge wave of relief, but he knew they weren't done yet. The pups had been alone for too long, and the chill of night was beginning to set in. They needed to get them back to their mother, and quickly. "We need to take them now," Beck said urgently as he crouched down to grab the first pup. The little wolves didn't resist, they were too weak to fight. Megan quickly picked up the other 2, holding them with utmost care. "Easy, little ones," she whispered, trying to soothe them as she felt the fragile warmth of their tiny bodies. "You'll be with your mom soon." Beck looked at Scout, who, having completed his task, resumed sniffing the air, as if ensuring there was no further danger around. "Let's head back quickly," Beck said. "Their mother needs to see them, and they need her." As they started their way back, the cold night wind blew through the trees, making the branches sway gently. The forest was growing darker, but now there was a new hope. Beck and Megan knew their journey wasn't over yet, but at least they had found the pups, and there was a chance to save them. What would you do in Beck and Megan's place? Could you stay calm when finding the pups in such a tense situations? The journey back felt endless. The cold night wind blew through the trees, and darkness enveloped Beck and Megan. But they couldn't stop. The pups, nestled in their arms, trembled from fear and cold. Each step was guided by the hope that their mother could protect them and that there was still time to save them. Scout ran ahead, occasionally glancing back to make sure his owners were close. The dog seemed to understand the urgency, as if he knew the task wouldn't be complete until the pups were safe. "I hope she still has the strength to care for them," Megan said, worried. The little wolves were weak, and she knew they would need their mother's warmth and milk immediately. "She will," Beck replied, trying to sound confident. "We've taken care of the injury. Now it's just a matter of getting them back together." Finally, they arrived home. The wolf was waiting in the corner where they had left her, her eyes attentive to the humans entering. Even exhausted, she lifted her head upon noticing the pups. A soft whimper escaped her throat. Megan knelt down and placed the pups on the floor, close to their mother. Beck did the same, and both watched with racing hearts. To their relief, the wolf stretched her body with effort and began to lick the pups one by one. She recognized them. Megan whispered, emotional. "She's taking care of them." The pups, feeling their mother's touch, slowly moved to snuggle against her body. Soon they started to nurse. Megan, overwhelmed with emotion, felt tears streaming down her face. "They're going to survive," she said softly with a sigh of relief. Beck stood up slowly and went to the kitchen, bringing a bowl of fresh water for the wolf. She glanced at him for a brief moment before returning her attention to the pups. "She's going to need a lot of rest," Beck said, placing the bowl beside her. But at least now she has her pups back. Megan gently stroked the wolf's fur, admiring her strength. She's an amazing mother. The relief was evident, but Beck knew that the work wasn't over yet. We need to monitor her over the next few days, he said. The injury could still get infected, and the pups are weak. But at least now, they have a chance. Megan nodded, still watching the wolf and her pups. We'll do everything we can. The wind howled outside. But inside the house, the atmosphere was calm. The wolf, though weak, was surrounded by her pups, and that seemed to be the most powerful remedy of all. In the days following the recovery of the pups, Beck, Megan, and Scout began to grow accustomed to the presence of the she-wolf and her little ones. The wolf remained cautious but accepted the food Beck brought, while the pups explored the house with growing curiosity. Scout, ever vigilant, watched the wolves from a distance, staying back but displaying continuous interest. Then, on a cold night, the calm was suddenly broken. Scout, lying near the door, perked up his ears and began to growl softly. Beck, who was outside gathering firewood, heard a distant howl. He stopped, alert. Soon, more howls echoed through the forest, closer this time. Beck returned inside with Scout by his side. "Did you hear that?" he asked Megan, who was already on her feet, concerned. "Yes," she replied, peering out the window. "It's wolves." The howls grew louder, and soon, dark shapes began moving in the shadows of the property. 6 wolves appeared, led by a large gray-coated leader. Scout growled softly, his eyes fixed on the newcomers. "Do you think they've come for hers?" Megan asked, glancing at the she-wolf, who was pacing nervously. "They must be her family," Beck replied, watching the pack, "but we don't know how they'll react." Scout took a few steps forward, but Beck called him back. "Stay here, boy." The she-wolf whimpered and approached the door. She wanted to go to them. Scout, still tense, growled softly but remained beside Beck, as if sensing something important was happening. "She wants to go back to them," Megan said gently. "But what about the pups? They're still weak." Beck hesitated. The pack may have been waiting for her for days, but are they friendly? The pack leader stepped closer to the house and let out a short howl. The she-wolf responded with a whimper and moved to the door. Scout watched every movement carefully, staying alert but holding back. Beck made a decision. "I'll let her go," he said, opening the door slowly. Scout moved closer to Beck, his eyes still fixed on the pack, but he stayed obediently by his side. The she-wolf stepped out cautiously, still limping, while the pack watched her closely. The leader approached her and, in an almost affectionate gesture, touched her muzzle. Scout let out a low growl, but Beck calmed him with a hand on his shoulder. "Stay here, Scout." The she-wolf looked back one last time before following the pack into the forest. Beck and Megan watched in silence as Scout remained alert, his muscles tense but showing no aggression. "She'll come back for the pups," Megan whispered, trying to reassure herself. The wolves disappeared into the darkness, and the house fell silent. Scout, still watchful, moved closer to the pups as if knowing they now needed protection. Beck closed the door with a deep sigh, casting a worried glance at the young wolves curled up in the corner of the kitchen. "Do you think Beck and Megan made the right choice by letting the she-wolf return to her pack? And how do you think Scout felt during the encounter?" The days following the she-wolf's reunion with her pack were filled with uncertainty for Beck and Megan. The house, once lively with the presence of the wolf and her pups, now felt strangely quiet. Scout spent his time ever watchful over the pups, who were growing stronger each day, but remained dependent. Whenever the wind carried a sound from the forest, Scout would perk up his ears, as if expecting the she-wolf to return at any moment. "Do you think she'll come back?" Megan asked one afternoon, gently stroking one of the sleeping pups. Her voice held a mix of hope and doubt. Beck, though equally unsure, tried to sound optimistic. "I think she will," he replied, though he knew the she-wolf was now with her pack. The wild was unpredictable, and uncertainty weighed heavily on his mind. At night, Beck and Scout would make their rounds around the house. The presence of the pups kept them on high alert. Scout, ever loyal, seemed to share Beck's sense of expectation, as if he, too, awaited the return of the mother wolf. Then, on a cold, silent morning, As Beck was gathering firewood, Scout began to bark. Beck rushed to the door, and when he opened it, he saw what they had been waiting for. At the edge of the forest, almost invisible among the trees, stood the she-wolf. She looked hesitant, but her eyes lit up when she saw the pups. "Megan!" Beck called urgently. She came running, and upon seeing the wolf, a relieved smile spread across her face. The she-wolf stepped forward cautiously, stopping a few meters from the house as though waiting for approval. Scout watched her intently, not growling but clearly alert. He seemed to understand that this was an important moment. Beck stepped forward and gave a gentle wave. "You can come," he whispered. The she-wolf approached cautiously, stopping at the entrance of the house. The pups immediately recognized her and ran to her, letting out small yelps of joy. The wolf licked them gently, and Megan, watching the scene, found tears welling in her eyes. "She's come to take them," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Beck nodded silently. He had known this moment would come, but he hadn't expected it so soon. The she-wolf looked at Beck and Megan, as if expressing gratitude for all they had done. Then, with one final glance, she began to move away slowly, the pups following her without hesitation. Scout took a step toward the she-wolf, as if wanting to follow, but Beck called him back with a low whistle. "Let them go, boy," he said softly. The dog obeyed, though his eyes remained fixed on the wolves disappearing into the trees. The three of them, Beck, Megan, and Scout, stood silently at the house's entrance, watching as the she-wolf and her pups vanished into the forest. There was an undeniable sense of emptiness, but also a deep sense of peace. They knew the pups were where they belonged in the wild with their mother. She did what she had to do, Megan said, gently stroking Scout. Beck nodded. "They'll be fine," he said, more to himself than to Megan. In the days that followed, the house settled into a quieter rhythm. Scout still kept an occasional watch on the forest, but the tension had lifted. Beck and Megan knew the she-wolf and her pups were far away, safe, living their wild lives. And somehow, that was exactly as it should be.